Clara stared at the crinkled $2 bill in her trembling hands. Her billionaire grandfather had left her cousin sprawling estates and offshore accounts, but the granddaughter who actually loved him. $2 measly. It felt like a cruel joke, until she noticed the impossible serial number printed on the back. The bitter Chicago wind whipped through Clara Jenkins's thin wool coat as she stood outside the towering glass and steel monolith of Prescott, Hayes, and Carmichael. She checked her reflection in the tinted glass, desperately trying to smooth her wind-blown hair. At 28, Clara was a single mother carrying the weight of the world. Her 7-year-old son, Noah, had severe asthma, and between his mounting medical bills and the exorbitant rent for their cramped one-bedroom apartment, Clara was drowning. She worked double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on. She took a deep breath, clutching the heavy cream envelope that had arrived in her mailbox 3 days prior. It was a formal summons to the reading of Reginald Wentworth's last will and testament. Reginald was Clara's grandfather, a ruthless industrialist who had built a shipping empire from the ground up. He was also a notoriously cold man who had estranged himself from Clara's mother decades ago. Clara had only met him a handful of times, mostly in his twilight years when she, out of a quiet sense of duty and pity, would bring Noah to visit the old man in his cavernous, lonely mansion. The rest of the family, the socialites, the boardroom sharks, only hovered around Reginald when they needed a check. Clara never asked for a dime. Stepping into the law firm's mahogany-paneled boardroom, Clara felt instantly out of place. The room smelled of polished leather, bitter espresso, and expensive cologne. Gathered around the massive conference table were the vultures. Her Aunt Beatrice, draped in cashmere and dripping with diamonds, barely gave Clara a passing glance. Her cousin, Preston, a sneering hedge fund manager, was busy scrolling through his phone, looking utterly bored by the proceedings. At the head of the table sat William Prescott, a silver-haired attorney with a perpetual frown. "Let us begin," Prescott announced, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. For the next 45 minutes, Clara sat in silence as Prescott read through the staggering distribution of Reginald Wentworth's empire. The numbers were dizzying. Beatrice was awarded the historic family estate in the Hamptons and a trust fund valued at over $30 million. Preston received controlling shares in the family's international shipping logistics company, a portfolio worth nearly $50 million. There were vintage car collections handed out to distant nephews and offshore accounts liquidated for various holding companies. With every million announced, Beatrice sat a little straighter, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Clara felt a heavy knot forming in her stomach. She hadn't come expecting millions, but she had desperately hoped her grandfather might leave her just enough to clear Noah's medical debt. Even $10,000 would have changed her entire life. And finally, Prescott said, adjusting his reading glasses as he flipped to the last page of the thick document. "To my granddaughter, Clara Jenkins." The room went completely still. Preston finally looked up from his phone. Beatrice narrowed her eyes, as if offended Clara was even mentioned. "To Clara," Prescott read, his voice faltering for a fraction of a second. "Who was the only one to visit me without asking for my checkbook. I leave the sum of $2, and the reminder that true wealth is found by those who know where to look." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the boardroom. Then, Preston let out a short, bark-like laugh. Beatrice covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with suppressed amusement. $2? Preston snorted. "Well, don't spend it all in one place, Clara." Prescott cleared his throat, looking distinctly uncomfortable. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a small, sealed manila envelope, and slid it across the polished table toward her. Clara's cheeks burned with the heat of 1,000 humiliations. She picked up the envelope. It was feather light, her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let Beatrice and Preston see her cry. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. Without another word to her family, she turned and walked out of the room, the echoes of her cousin's laughter following her all the way to the elevator. When she finally reached the frozen sidewalk outside, Clara broke down. The sheer cruelty of it broke her heart. Reginald hadn't just forgotten her. He had gone out of his way to insult her on public record. He had made her a punchline. She pulled her coat tightly around her shivering frame and began the long, cold walk to the bus stop, the humiliating manila envelope clutched tightly in her pocket. It was past midnight by the time Clara finally got Noah to sleep. The radiator in their apartment was clanking loudly, struggling to fight off the freezing draft coming through the single-pane windows. Clara sat at her tiny kitchen table, a chipped mug of cheap, lukewarm tea resting in front of her. Under the harsh glare of the overhead bulb, the manila envelope sat unopened. Part of her wanted to tear it up and throw it in the trash. She had half a mind to mail it back to Prescott's office with a few choice words. But as she stared at it, her grandfather's cryptic final words echoed in her mind. The reminder that true wealth is found by those who know where to look. Reginald Wentworth was many things, ruthless, cunning, arrogant, but he was never frivolous. He didn't do things by accident. Every move he made during his life was calculated, like a grandmaster playing a silent game of chess. Slowly, Clara reached out and tore open the flap. She tipped the envelope over. A single, crisp, modern $2 bill fluttered out and landed on the scratched Formica table. Thomas Jefferson's portrait stared back at her. There was no letter, no map, nothing else. Just $2. Clara let out a bitter sigh, rubbing her exhausted eyes. Tomorrow, she would use it to buy a gallon of milk. That was the reality of her life. She picked up the bill, ready to toss it into her meager wallet when her thumb brushed against the paper. She stopped. It felt wrong. Having worked as a waitress handling cash for a decade, Clara knew what currency felt like. The linen-cotton blend of American money had a specific texture. This bill felt slightly too thick, almost rigid in the center. Frowning, she held the bill up to the bare light bulb overhead. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Embedded within the paper, right through the center of the Declaration of Independence engraving on the back, was a microscopic, metallic security thread. But it wasn't the standard vertical strip found in higher denomination bills. It was woven in a strange, horizontal zigzag pattern. Clara quickly flipped the bill over and inspected the green serial numbers. On a normal bill, the serial numbers match perfectly. But on this bill, the sequence on the bottom left was standard. B 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8A. The sequence on the top right, however, was entirely different. It wasn't a standard serial number at all. It read SDB-774-FFT-CH. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. True wealth is found by those who know where to look. Clara grabbed her battered laptop, practically throwing it open, and waited an agonizing 2 minutes for it to boot up. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she typed the strange sequence into the search engine. At first, nothing came up but random part numbers for car engines. She broke it down. CH could stand for Chicago. SDB was universally used in banking as an acronym for Safe Deposit Box. Box 774, she whispered into the quiet kitchen. But what was FFT? She searched for banks in Chicago with those initials. 10 minutes of scrolling yielded nothing but generic financial terminology. Frustrated, she typed, FFT, Private Wealth Management, Chicago. A single link appeared at the bottom of the first page. First Fidelity Trust. It wasn't a commercial bank. It was an ultra-exclusive private depository located deep in the financial district of Chicago, established in the late 1800s. They didn't advertise. They didn't have ATMs. They catered exclusively to the city's oldest and wealthiest families. Clara barely slept that night. The next morning, after dropping Noah off at school, with a stern reminder to keep his scarf over his mouth in the cold, she took the L train back downtown. First Fidelity Trust was located inside a heavily guarded, unmarked limestone building on LaSalle Street. There were no glass doors or friendly tellers, just a heavy brass door and an imposing security guard who looked Clara up and down with deep suspicion. "I'm here to access a box," Clara said, her voice sounding much braver than she felt. She was escorted into a quiet, windowless lobby panelled in dark oak. A distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit glided out from a back office. His name tag read, "Mr. Sterling, Vault Manager." "May I help you, madam?" Mr. Sterling asked, his tone polite but undeniably dismissive of her worn coat and scuffed boots. "I need to access Safe Deposit Box 774, Clara said. Mr. Sterling's polite smile vanished. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features. "Box 774? Madam, that box has been sealed under strict instructions for over a decade. Access requires a highly specific bearer instrument." Clara reached into her pocket, her hand shaking slightly, and pulled out the $2 bill. She placed it flat on the velvet-lined counter. Mr. Sterling produced a jeweler's loupe from his pocket and leaned over the bill. He examined the mismatched serial number, then held it up to a specialized ultraviolet scanner under the desk. A hidden watermark, completely invisible to the naked eye, illuminated in bright, glowing gold. It was Reginald Wentworth's personal crest. Mr. Sterling looked up, his demeanor entirely transformed. He bowed his head slightly. "Right this way, Miss Jenkins. We have been waiting for you for a very long time." Clara's heart pounded violently against her ribs as she followed the manager down a spiraling marble staircase and into the subterranean vault. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and steel. Wall after wall of gleaming brass doors stretched out in front of them. Mr. Sterling led her to the very back, stopping before a large, oversized door marked 774. He inserted his master key, then gestured for Clara to hand over the bill. He slid the bill into a hidden biometric scanner, disguised in the paneling. The light turned green. A heavy lock clicked open. Mr. Sterling pulled out a long, heavy metal lockbox, placed it on a private viewing table, and quietly exited the room, leaving Clara completely alone. With trembling hands, Clara unlatched the heavy clasps and flipped open the lid. There was no cash inside, no gold bars. Instead, sitting at the bottom of the velvet-lined box was a thick, leather-bound ledger, a tarnished brass skeleton key, and a handwritten letter sealed with red wax. Clara broke the seal and unfolded the heavy parchment. The handwriting was unmistakably her grandfather's, sharp, jagged, and aggressive. "Clara," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you are smart enough to look past the surface. Your Aunt Beatrice and Cousin Preston are fools. They celebrated their inheritances today, blind to the fact that I left them poisoned chalices. The estates are leveraged to the hilt, the companies are drowning in hidden debt, and the SEC will be raiding Preston's offices by the end of the week." Clara gasped, dropping the letter onto the table. "They only ever wanted the easy money, Clara. So I gave them the illusion of it, along with all my liabilities. But you know how to survive. You know the value of hard work. That is why I have left you the true Wentworth Empire. Clara slowly reached into the box and pulled out the heavy leather ledger. As she flipped open the first page, her eyes widened in absolute shock at the string of zeros staring back at her. The $2 wasn't an insult. It was the key to a staggering, hidden fortune that was about to turn her entire world upside down. Clara's eyes scanned the heavy, cream-colored pages of the ledger, her mind struggling to process the impossible string of numbers. Page 1 detailed an offshore account at J. Safra Saracen in Geneva. The balance was $84 million. Page 2 listed the absolute deed to a 400-acre vineyard in Napa Valley. Page 3 documented a controlling 70% stake in a biomedical research firm based in Boston, a firm that, according to the notes scrawled in the margins, held the primary patents for the exact respiratory medication her son Noah relied upon to breathe. Her breath hitched. She flipped to the next page, and a choked sob finally escaped her lips. At the top of the page, written in Reginald's unmistakable, sharp hand, was the name of a private Delaware holding company, the Noah Trust. Beneath it was a clean, untraceable portfolio of municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks valued at over $200 million. Clara wiped her eyes, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the book. She turned back to the letter her grandfather had left her. "I spent the last 10 years of my life building a ghost empire, Clara," the letter continued. "I watched my daughter, your mother, walk away, and I watched the rest of my family turn into greedy, soulless parasites. I knew that if I left them my true wealth, they would squander it and destroy whatever legacy I had left. So, I hollowed out the Wentworth Corporation from the inside. I loaded the flagship companies with toxic debt, signed disastrous leverage agreements, and legally bound Beatrice and Preston to the sinking ship. The lawyers, including that fool William Prescott, only know what I allowed them to see. The brass key in this box opens a private office on the 42nd floor of the Tribune Tower. Everything you need is there, but you will not do this alone. Call the number on the back of this parchment. Harrison Cole is my shadow executor. He has been on retainer for 5 years, waiting for the day someone brought him the $2 bill. Clara turned the parchment over. A single Chicago phone number was stamped in black ink. She left the underground vault in a daze, clutching the heavy ledger against her chest, hidden deep inside her oversized tote bag. The bitter Chicago cold outside no longer felt quite so biting. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything had shifted on its axis. From a payphone at a nearby corner deli, terrified that her own cheap cell phone might somehow drop the call, Clara dialed the number. It rang only twice. "Cole," a deep, gravelly voice answered. "My name is Clara Jenkins," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder at the busy street. "I have a $2 bill." There was a heavy pause on the line. Then the voice softened, carrying a weight of immense relief. "Ms. Jenkins, I was beginning to worry you had thrown it away. Give me your location. A car will be there in 10 minutes. Harrison Cole was not a lawyer in a stiff suit. When Clara met him in the mahogany-lined private suite at the Tribune Tower, she found a man in his late 50s wearing a thick fisherman's sweater and reading glasses, surrounded by stacks of financial dossiers. He had kind, shrewd eyes that immediately assessed her worn coat and exhausted posture. "Your grandfather was a difficult man, Clara," Harrison said gently, pouring her a cup of hot black tea. "But he was a brilliant strategist. He knew exactly what Beatrice and Preston would do. He knew they wouldn't look past the surface." "Is it all real?" Clara asked, gesturing to the ledger she had placed on his desk. "The biomedical firm? The trust?" "Every single cent," Harrison confirmed. "The assets in that ledger are completely clean, heavily protected by ironclad trusts and legally isolated from the impending collapse of the main Wentworth estate. As of this morning, you are one of the wealthiest private individuals in the Midwest. Clara closed her eyes, the sheer gravity of it pressing down on her shoulders. "My son," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He needs a specialist. His asthma. We've been drowning in hospital bills." Harrison smiled, a warm, genuine expression. "Ms. Jenkins, as the majority shareholder of the biomedical firm that manufactures his treatments, you can buy the hospital if you wish. Let's get your boy the best doctors in the world. Today." The next 3 weeks were a blur of quiet, monumental changes. Clara quit her double shifts at the diner, leaving a $10,000 tip for her manager, a kind woman who had covered for her when Noah was sick. She moved Noah out of their freezing apartment and into a stunning, discreetly guarded penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Noah was immediately placed under the care of Dr. Eris Gallagher, the top pediatric pulmonologist in the country, and for the first time in his life, the boy could run across a room without gasping for air. While Clara's life blossomed in absolute secrecy, the public facade of the Wentworth family spectacularly imploded. It started on a Tuesday. Clara was sitting in her new, sunlit kitchen, drinking a latte when the breaking news banner flashed across the television screen. FBI and SEC raid Wentworth Logistics headquarters. Helicopter footage showed dozens of federal agents swarming the very same glass and steel monolith where Clara had been humiliated just weeks prior. The camera zoomed in to show her cousin, Preston, being led out of the revolving doors in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale with terror. Reginald's trap had snapped shut. The offshore debts had matured. The fraudulent shell companies Preston thought he had inherited were exposed as federal liabilities, and Preston, as the new controlling shareholder, was legally holding the bag. 2 days later, the financial dominoes reached Aunt Beatrice. The historic Hamptons estate, which Beatrice had immediately attempted to borrow against to fund a new yacht, was revealed to be entangled in a toxic reverse mortgage tied to the failing logistics company. The bank seized the property. Beatrice's multi-million-dollar trust fund was frozen pending a federal audit of the Wentworth estate. They were penniless. Worse, they were millions of dollars in debt. 2 months after the reading of the will, Clara received a frantic, confused voicemail from William Prescott. The attorney's usual dry arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a trembling panic. "Clara, please," Prescott begged on the recording. "Beatrice and Preston are demanding a meeting. The estate is gone. Everything is in receivership. They think your grandfather might have left a secondary policy. They want to see you." Clara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline. Noah was sitting on the plush rug behind her, laughing as he built a massive Lego castle, breathing easily, his cheeks flushed with healthy color. She slipped into a tailored, understated Loro Piana cashmere coat, a quiet armor of extreme wealth, and headed downtown. When Clara entered the mahogany-paneled boardroom at Prescott's firm, the atmosphere was entirely different from the first time. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Preston was pacing the floor. He looked like he had aged 10 years. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, likely the only one the feds hadn't confiscated. Beatrice sat at the table, her face haggard, her diamonds gone, replaced by deep, dark circles under her eyes. When Clara walked in, Preston stopped dead in his tracks. He took in her immaculate appearance, the quiet confidence radiating from her, and his jaw slackened. "Clara," Beatrice croaked, her voice devoid of its usual aristocratic sneer. "You look well." "I'm doing fine, Aunt Beatrice," Clara said calmly, taking the exact same seat she had occupied months ago. Preston slammed his hands on the table. Cut the small talk. The feds took everything, Clara. Grandpa set us up. The company is a black hole of debt. We're facing prison time for financial crimes he orchestrated before he died. Preston ran a frantic hand through his thinning hair. You didn't get any of the companies. You just got that stupid $2, which means the feds aren't watching you. We need you to take out a loan for us. You have clean credit. We need a legal defense fund. Clara looked at her cousin, truly seeing the pathetic, greedy core of him. They hadn't called her to apologize. They hadn't called to ask how Noah was doing. They just wanted to use her again. I don't think I'll be doing that, Preston, Clara said, her voice smooth as glass. You selfish little brat, Beatrice shrieked, suddenly slamming her fist on the table. We are your family. We are losing everything. And you won't even help us? Clara slowly reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, legal dossier prepared by Harrison Cole. She tossed it onto the center of the polished table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. What is this? Preston asked, eyeing the folder suspiciously. That is a summary of the true Wentworth estate, Clara said. The one grandfather hid from the SEC, from the auditors, and most importantly, from you. Preston's hands shook as he opened the folder. Beatrice leaned over, her eyes scanning the top page, her face drained of whatever color it had left. The biomedical patents, the Delaware holdings, the Swiss accounts. Preston stammered, looking up at Clara with wide, horrified eyes. Who owns this? This is worth hundreds of millions. I do, Clara said simply. Grandfather didn't leave me $2, Preston. He left me the key to a subterranean vault at First Fidelity Trust. He left me his ghost empire. Dead silence filled the boardroom. Prescott, the lawyer, looked like he was going to faint. You set us up, Beatrice whispered, tears of sheer rage and disbelief welling in her eyes. No, Beatrice. Reginald set you up because he knew exactly who you were, Clara said, standing up. You hovered around him like vultures waiting for a carcass. I was the only one who visited him just to hold his hand. He rewarded my loyalty, and he punished your greed. Preston fell into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I'm going to federal prison, Clara. They're going to lock me away. Please, you have the money. You can buy the debt. You can save the logistics company. Clara looked down at the two people who had mocked her poverty, who had laughed at her while her son was struggling to breathe. She had the power to crush them completely. She had the power to let Preston rot in a cell and let Beatrice live on the streets. But Clara was not Reginald. She was not cruel. Harrison Cole has already purchased the toxic debt from the logistics company through a proxy firm, Clara said coldly. The federal charges against you will be dropped by tomorrow morning, Preston. You aren't going to prison. Preston looked up, a pathetic gasp of hope escaping his lips. Oh, thank God. Clara, thank you. Thank you. I can rebuild the company. I can... You misunderstand, Clara interrupted, her voice snapping like a whip. I bought the debt. I own the company now, which means I own you. You are stripped of your title as CEO. You have no shares, no equity, and no power. She turned to Beatrice. And you, Aunt Beatrice. The Hamptons estate is being liquidated to cover the pensions of the warehouse workers Reginald laid off 10 years ago. Then what are we supposed to do? Beatrice wailed. How will we live? Clara pulled 2 small, crisp envelopes from her pocket and slid one to each of them. Inside those envelopes, you will find employment contracts. Preston, there is an opening for a mid-level logistics dispatcher at a warehouse in Cleveland. The salary is $60,000 a year. Beatrice, there is an administrative assistant position available in the HR department of my new biomedical firm. You will both be provided with modest, two-bedroom apartments close to your new jobs. Your rent will be deducted from your paychecks." Preston stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "You want me to work in a warehouse?" "I want you to learn the value of $1, Clara said, her eyes flashing with a fierce, unbreakable strength. "You can sign the contracts, or you can walk out of this room with absolutely nothing. The choice is yours." Clara didn't wait to see them open the envelopes. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what they would do. Survival had a funny way of stripping away arrogance. She turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, her head held high. When Clara stepped out of the glass and steel building, the Chicago air was crisp and clear. Her driver, waiting by the sleek black sedan at the curb, opened the door for her. She slid into the warm leather seat, pulling out her phone to look at a picture Harrison had just sent her. It was a photo of Noah, running happily through the indoor botanical gardens near their new home, a massive, unburdened smile on his face. Clara smiled back at the screen. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the crisp edge of a framed $2 bill she now carried with her everywhere. True wealth wasn't just about knowing where to look. It was knowing what truly mattered once you found it. Did Clara do the right thing by taking control and leaving her greedy family with the bare minimum? Or should she have let them face the federal consequences of their actions? Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's forcing entitled people to finally work for a living. What would you have done with the $2 secret? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible true-life dramas.